Inspiration, clarity, confidence, and wholehearted business strategy. Welcome to Your Next Chapter, the podcast especially for women in their 40s and beyond who know that business and personal development go hand in hand. Tune in each week for marketing, mindset, and personal growth strategies, along with inspiring stories from women around the world who are creating new businesses and lives that are personally fulfilling and financially rewarding. If you're looking to create a business and life you love, you're in great company. Let's find out what will unfold in your next chapter. I'm your host, Angela Rasmus, and I'm so delighted that you're here. Well, hello everybody, this is Angela Rasmus and welcome back to another episode of the Your Next Chapter podcast. And today our wholehearted conversation is with the lovely Suzanne Scarrow, who's up in gorgeous sunny Queensland, probably a lot better off than horrible rainy Sydney today. But we're going to be diving into a deep conversation about one of my very favourite subjects and tools, the emotional freedom technique, or as you may be knowing it as, tapping. But that's just the tip of the iceberg we're going to have in the conversation with this lovely lady. Suzanne, thank you so much for spending your time here with us today.
Oh, very welcome. I'm glad to be with you, Angela.
Fantastic. Well, just to let our listeners know, the connection between you and I is I actually went down this path and had my practitioner's training with you over the last couple of years, which was an awesome experience that really opened me up to the power of this particular modality and this particular tool, which you have all through your own practice. But as I love to start off these podcast interviews is to find out what were the chapters before this chapter. So if you can give us some background on the journey that you've taken to come to this place in the way that you're showing up in your business and life.
Sure, happy to do that. So I guess, motherhood was the beginning of it, and all the struggles of that, and then divorce and trying to build a life. I think that I knew that I wanted to be a counsellor way back when I was 7 years old. But unfortunately for me, I spoke to somebody back then and I said, I want to be a psychologist. And they said, oh, no, you don't want to do that. Some people will think that you're psychoanalyzing them. And of course, I had no idea what psychoanalyzing was at that point, but it didn't sound very good. So I put that dream away for many, many moons. And it wasn't until after the divorce, in my late 30s, I think, when I went back to when I went to university and studied eventually to become a psychologist. But always as a psychologist, I always felt like there was, I was helping people understand why they felt like they did, but it wasn't actually clearing the blockages that stopped them from moving forward in their life. So that wasn't really good enough for me. So I went on my journey searching, and I guess the next chapter started for me when I was out in the early 2000s. So emotional freedom techniques started in San Francisco, actually, with Gary Craig in 1995. I didn't find it until about 2003, 2004, and then I started to study it. And so, that was the beginning of my next chapter.
That's a really interesting point that you made about sharing a dream and then having that sort of reaction, which really catapulted you off on a different path.
Completely. Just wiped out that dream for so many years.
And I guess with the work that you've done, that wouldn't be an unfamiliar territory that people have been in, yeah?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I find now that a lot of clients, and I suppose it's because I've been on that journey, a lot of clients who come to me are in a similar situation. And really, they're just wanting to get, actually, I had someone say today, she just wanted to get her compass on the right direction. And I felt that summarised it really beautifully, because when you realign with who you really are, rather than trying to live your life for somebody else and do what they expect of you, then you can really break through, the passion that you feel about what you're doing just really breaks through all of those limits. And then, of course, EFT will clear whatever is stuck there and away you go.
Yeah, I've certainly found it to be a great modality, and we'll dive into that one shortly. But I'd just like to stay in that spot just for a moment, because that idea of once you came through the divorce and then decided, okay, I'm going to go back, I'm going to pursue that dream, I'm going to university. Could you revisit that time just for a moment for us? Because I think that that's a really important point to dwell on, because there'd be more than one person listening who is standing on that cusp and has something that's sitting inside that they want to pursue, but for whatever reasons are holding themselves back. How did you actually get the courage and the conviction to take the action to revitalize that dream that you'd had and step forward?
Yeah, well, I'd love to say it was easy, but it wasn't. It was quite a struggle because, as you can imagine, I'm, going through a divorce and the grief and the loss about all of that, and then there's the three children to bring up on my own, aging parents, all those complications that we all have in our life. And so it was just step by step, really, to begin with. I suppose that dream really hadn't been completely extinguished, my 7-year-old dream. And so I think that was the driving force that got me just step by step through the process of becoming a psychologist, and really the frustration of being a psychologist and really not being able to clear the emotional blockages that people had that were stopping them in their tracks. That the frustration of that was the thing that sort of catapulted me forward from there, I think.
That's a really good point. That concept of the frustration. I often speak to people about how they see the gap that's missing, or there may be, like, for example, there's a friend of mine down in Melbourne who works in the marketing area very much like I did, and seeing that there was a frustration with the way that the world was marketing itself in terms of businesses, and she really felt that the wholehearted piece, the conscious marketing piece, was missing, and that became her motivation. And likely with what I'm hearing from you, that frustration of, I just can't help people close those gaps, and so that then led you to go down that new pathway. So quite often it's what we see that annoys us, or that that makes us sort of like, and that desire to change, that can provide that catalyst and that motivation a lot. So that's a really interesting pattern that I've seen quite often.
It is, and it's just a feeling of being out of alignment, is how I like to say it, because when you get into alignment and you're doing what you're passionate about, and really what I think you're called to do, it just becomes easy. There's no struggle in it anymore.
That's where the flow is, where
Exactly.
you following your intuition. How much, I know this isn't perhaps a question that we've spoken about before, but how much do you rely on the idea of intuition to guide you with the directions that you want to move in?
Yeah, more and more as I age. I probably didn't realise that I used intuition at all until a supervisor in one of my early counselling jobs said, "Do you work with intuition a lot?" And at that point I thought about it, and yes, I did even then, but even more now. And without your intuition, you really are out of alignment. So I think it's vital.
So how does it feel to you when you're following your intuition? So I think it's an expression that people undoubtedly have heard a lot, but what does it actually feel like or look like in principle for you?
Yeah, it's a kind of a difficult to explain thing, but I guess the best way I can say is it feels right, it feels in alignment, it feels joyous, it feels comfortable. There are many words like that. I was just listening to Oprah just before we came on, and she was saying, if you're struggling to move on, you can't do that until you have the stillness within yourself. And so she went out and sat in what she calls her apostle group of 12 trees and found that stillness for herself. And I think that's it. You've got to find that stillness, and then you feel that intuition flowing. I would call it the God energy flowing, universal energy, whatever you want to call it. It's all the same thing. And then it's a feeling of knowing and feeling comfortable in it.
And there's a lack of struggle, is my experience of it as well. So I think just a great example for me personally is I was in the kitchen the other night doing anything but work, and an idea just arrived. It literally arrived, and I went, that feels fantastic. That got me curious. I was excited by it, and I hadn't struggled to come up with it. It certainly wasn't something that I was sitting there with pen and paper trying to work out. It literally arrived. It felt good. I followed it. It's up on my website, etc., etc., and it just happened so easily.
And it feels so good. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's just a little hint for anyone who's listening in here. What is this intuition thing? It's the feeling. It's that
Yeah.
curiosity, or that desire that comes in it, and it feels right. I think that was the best description. It feels right, so follow it. So
Yeah.
so that's what was happening for you when you realized that something A didn't feel right. There was a gap. And so you started to look at, how might I close that gap for my clients? How can I help them overcome those emotional blocks? And that's when you started looking around for what that modality might be. Was there alternatives to EFT, or was it that when you found that, when you were doing your research, you went like, aha, this feels right. This is the thing.
Yeah.
Let me follow it.
Yeah, it was very much that aha thing, and I'm thinking about it now, and it seems more like it found me than I found it. Um, like a lot of people who come across EFT, that I found it really strange and really odd thing to do, and I think specifically because I'd been trained as a psychologist, and really, if I couldn't see it and touch it and feel it, it didn't really exist. It felt really an odd thing to do, to be tapping on yourself and clear emotional blockages. But when I saw for the third time, it took 3 times for me to really understand that this was a really powerful tool. That third time, it was just like you in the kitchen the other night. It was an idea that just popped into my head, and I just knew at that point that I had to use it. And I've pretty much used it with every client ever since, with amazing success.
Well, let's actually dive down into it, because I think a lot of people have heard that expression, tapping or EFT, but there'd be equally so people that have never heard of it that are listening, or that have heard of it but aren't really sure what it means. So can you give us an introduction and a bit of a description as to what the actual process is and how it works?
Sure. So I said about Gary Craig. Gary Craig is the founder of EFT. In 1995, he was looking for a solution to the long term counselling that people were going through. He wasn't a counsellor, interestingly enough. He was an engineer, and he has been shown a process of what's called thought field therapy. So it was another version of tapping, but it was a much more involved process of diagnosing and so on. And he actually paid $100,000 to learn this process of thought field therapy, and then looked at it and said, well, really, we've only got 14 energy meridians in our body. It was a matter of sort of diagnosing and then tapping on particular meridians. And he said, as his engineer's brain took him to the idea, we've only got those 14 meridians, why don't we just tap on all of them for any issue, and that will clear the emotional blockages. So his system of tapping on these energy meridians is based on the understanding that all negative emotions, not some, but all negative emotions, are caused by a disruption in the body's energy system. So what that really means is something awful happens to you, there's a disruption in the energy system in the body. That energy system blockage actually holds on to the emotion, and most often that emotion holds on to a visual or an auditory or a smell, maybe, memory of that event. You'll often come across people who've perhaps been raped or something like that, and there's a smell of, say, a cigar smoke smell or something like that holds that memory. And so whenever they smell cigar smoke, they're pushed straight back into that memory. And so what the tapping does is you're actually tapping on those energy meridians. It's a vibrational process that clears the blockage. The blockage goes, the emotion goes, and then also the picture, visual or auditory, smell, whatever it is, will change as well. And so it's a very simple process. It maybe seems too simple, but once that blockage is cleared, that emotion is gone and you can't have it back.
Wow, and that's hearing it like that, the totality of it, that it has that ability to make a change instantaneously.
Yeah.
That's probably the part that is like, that has the wow factor. And I mean, I've seen it happen now when I've been in training, where I was certainly from the school of thought of, if I can't touch it, if I can't see it, I'm really not too sure if this is actually going to work. So let's just go in there for a moment on that concept of the meridian lines, because again, that may be something that people aren't too familiar with. Can you just give us a little bit of an understanding as to what they are, how they operate within our body?
Sure. So essentially it's an energy that flows through our body, similar to the blood veins and arteries and so on, but it's an energy that flows through our veins. Look, some people would say it's a God energy. Some people might call it intuition. But whatever it is, it's got something to do with holding on to our emotional, shock memory, that sort of thing. And so when there is a disruption in the flow of that energy, the shock is held in place. The body can get quite sick when that happens. So I really can't give you a scientific explanation about it, but what I know is once you clear those blocks out of that energy system, the body can heal itself of all sorts of things. It can, physical things and emotional things, and you can be completely clear of whatever the emotion was. So, you can have something like, so let's just use that example, one of the worst experiences of a rape. You can be so traumatized by that rape and do this tapping process on it and be clear of it within minutes, sometimes, not always, but often that's the case. You can really clear the trauma so that the person who was previously 5 minutes ago traumatized completely and completely overwhelmed with emotion about it is now looking at that event as though it's almost a movie that they're not even in anymore. They're detached from it.
So it's really reducing that emotional reaction.
Exactly, and I'm sure there's a much better technical explanation of it, but I don't feel the need to know that because it actually works. So
I remember that was one of the things that was really impressed upon me is that, and one of the things that I found really appealing is that you don't have to understand it. You don't even have to expect it's going to work. If you can just come to this process with an open mind, you can be incredibly surprised by the shifts that can occur. That was the thing that really took my breath away.
That's it. Yeah, there is no need to believe that it's going to work at all, and it will still work.
I've heard it referred to as emotional acupuncture. Do you think that's a good description?
Well, it is if people understand acupuncture because, it's like building a bridge from what they know to this new strange process. So, and it does work on the same energy meridians that an acupuncturist would use or an acupressure practitioner would use. So, yeah, that's a pretty good description, really.
Yeah, and it's I remember hearing that and thinking, well, that makes sense, and you don't have to have needles, so it made even more sense. that one felt good.
Pain-free, and it's pain-free in that sense, but it's also very easy on when you go to a counsellor and you go to have something released. Often you will expect that it's going to be a very deep emotional experience, but it doesn't have to be. With the tapping process, you can ease into it and sort of sneak up on the problem, and by the time you get to the crucial piece of the problem, there's nothing left, and so you can do it not completely emotion free, but free of the intense emotion that you might expect.
And do you feel that, or one of the parts that I found appealing about the modality was that people could have almost a DIY approach? Obviously, if you've got some significant issues, working with a practitioner is a very good idea, as it is with any modality. But that fact that we can empower people to actually utilize the technique, as and when they need it, is really appealing. Have you found that with your own clients?
Yeah, definitely, Angela. That's so true. I mean, people, once they have this technique, and you can learn it very easily in a few minutes, once they have the technique, they can use it for themselves anywhere, anytime, for any issue. But you're absolutely right. Most of the time, clients who come to me, for example, will not be able to work with themselves, mostly because we sort of hide from whatever it is that's blocking us, or maybe it's just unconscious to us, so we're not aware of it at all. And so when they come to me, it's probable that I will pick up on a pattern of behaviour, and then we'll go back and clear that pattern from early childhood often. And sometimes even now that I'm working with matrix re-imprinting, we go back even to in utero and clear the patterns that start even from way back there. And so, yeah, often it is necessary to have a practitioner, but you can certainly use it for yourself. Try it on anything, anywhere, anytime, any issue.
Brilliant, and I know on your own website there is some great video examples of how to do the tapping, so I'll make sure that we link through to there so that people can have a look if this is a very new area for them. Yep. I'd love to know, because obviously you've been doing this for quite some time, so you would have seen lots and lots of different things, but so not being specific obviously about any particular person, but am I right in thinking that there are some classic, what I would call misbeliefs, or what you would call blocks, which come up quite often for people?
Absolutely true. Most often, especially between 0 and I mean conception to 7, sometimes conception to 8, we form beliefs about ourselves like I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable enough, I'm not worthy, those kinds of things. And they come up quite regularly. I suppose the big ones would be I'm not worthy, I'm not lovable, the world's not a safe place. And when they come up, most often we've got to go all the way back to those very early years to clear where the child learned that. And once they take that belief on because an event happens and they think something like, perhaps mum and dad are fighting in the kitchen and they want to stop the fight and they can't do it, so they feel, I can't be lovable because if I was lovable enough, mum and dad wouldn't fight, or I mustn't be worthy enough for them to think about me when they're doing this fighting. It's not a truth, but it becomes the child's truth. And then, of course, they build on that. And it becomes their truth, and, it just follows through their life, and they reinforce it and reinforce that core belief, I would call it.
So core beliefs, and so there is those deep core beliefs, and then there'd be other perhaps less prolific ones or deep ones that sit on top as well.
Exactly. That's right. Like, people then would start, if I feel not worthy enough, then I would start to worry about people judging me and I'm not as good as other people around me, or I can't succeed at that because, people like us don't succeed at those things, or my family, we struggle. And life has to be a struggle. Those kinds of things would then come in to reinforce that core belief, definitely.
Yeah, so there's layers there that we need to unpack.
Yes.
And do you see, because a lot of the people who are in my community are moving into, of course, their next chapters, and quite often that involves creating a business that is leveraging their life experience. Have you found that the core beliefs or the misbeliefs that trip up or block somebody in business are different or have a particular flavour?
I wouldn't say different. I think that either in your workplace or your relationship or your goal setting, these beliefs will come up. But they're pretty much across the board, I would say. But if you're making that big life-changing step of trying to begin a new business, the new next chapter in your life, then if you are stopped in doing that, you will find it's one of those core beliefs that's stopping you. And the good news is it's easy to find it and clear it. So, don't be hard on yourself. Just acknowledge that, yes, there's a pattern to my self-sabotage, or there's a pattern to my not achieving what I want to achieve, and find a practitioner who can help you clear that core belief.
So I'd love to just dive into that a bit more there. So, because there's this concept of the unconscious beliefs and the conscious beliefs. So I guess I'm thinking of like an iceberg here. So above the waterline, you might see and be aware of particular things like I'm procrastinating, or, I'm feeling fear around this, or, I'm sabotaging, or whatever the case may be, that there's actually self-awareness there. But then that acknowledgement that there's deeper issues or deeper reasoning behind that. Is there anything that, if someone's sitting here listening today and thinking, I reckon I have got some blocks, how can we begin the process with ourselves of starting to uncover those? Are there particular questions we can ask ourselves, or how do you dial up your self-awareness to actually recognize there is a block, this is possibly what it is, now I can start doing something about it?
Absolutely. Certainly you could sit down and sort of think about, what are the patterns in my life. But if you like, I've got a list that I use with clients and I can send it to you and you can give it to your listeners. It's just a tick chart, and you go through this chart and score the belief. So it might be I'm unworthy, and your score might be, say 80% or something like that. Then you need to go back to those that score quite highly and check through all of them and clear them. I'm sure there are other ways, none that are coming to mind at the moment because I use that tool on such a regular basis that it's the one I depend on. But usually it would either be in the patterns of things that happen in your life, like I always start something and I never quite finish it, or, there's no point in me starting a business because my family don't succeed at business, or that kind of thing, would be a hint. But this chart I find really pins it down for you. So I'll send that to you this afternoon, and you can send that out if you'd like to.
That would be fantastic. I think that chart would be a great place to start, because I think we get to, and again, this is probably talking in broad sweeping statements, but that's okay. They all start rooted in reality, that we get to this point in life where we start to go, you know what, I want to understand more. I want to start making steps forwards. I don't want to settle any longer. I know there's some things that are tripping me up. And I've become more aware of, patterns when I've dialed up my self-awareness and started to see the same things coming through, which is why I have practitioners. I have people that I work with that help me, because it's very hard to see the spot that you're standing on.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah.
So how have you found, obviously you've been making some wonderful differences in the lives of your clients, but with EFT, and I'd love to hear more about the matrix re-imprinting as well, how has this helped you in your own life?
Oh, it's immeasurable. Really, I was in a position in those early 2000s that I talked about before I found EFT. I was, I would say, maybe challenged by the experience of life to the degree that it felt like I had a great big jigsaw, a huge jigsaw, and lots of questions, lots of pieces of that jigsaw about how the world works were completely just missing, and I had no idea how to find them. So then I started my journey with EFT, and things started to fall into place. It was almost like, the jigsaw pieces came flying out of the universe into the places where they should be, because I was clearing my distress from the past, the divorce and upset with my father and all things like that. And then I came a little bit further on the journey and found matrix re-imprinting. Now, that's a process that uses the tapping process, but it actually takes it a step further and takes the client to the memory, so that you're actually working with the memory rather than with the client who's sitting right there in front of you. It's not something that you would do on your own, because it can take you places, you can sort of leapfrog to places that are not safe for you. You need to do that with a practitioner. But it actually takes you into that place of the memory. You can heal the hurt of that memory, and then you can get the client, the little clients, say the 6-year-old client, to re-imprint their belief about themselves. And that's the beauty of matrix re-imprinting. I love it so much, and it just gets the most amazing results. Along with that came my learning about law of attraction. It all kind of converged, I suppose, at the right time for me. And once I learned that I am the creator of my experience, both good and bad, and it's in my control, and I can take my power back by shifting the way I feel, by shifting the way I think, now all the pieces of the jigsaw fell back into place. And so, it's indescribable how much of a difference it's made to me. It's allowed me to feel understanding of the world, understanding of myself, safe in the world, peaceful and joyous most of the time, not 100%, but most of the time. And when I'm not peaceful and joyous, I can easily get myself back to that state.
That piece there is the most, for me, the most resonant and attractive piece in this whole conversation, this whole journey, because we can't feel fabulous all the time. Life does throw curveballs at us.
Absolutely.
And we need to roll with that. We need to feel it, to accept it, to move through it. But then how do we take ourselves back up from that place of unhappiness, of where you feel flattened or disappointed or sad? How do we then actually not just wait around for things to improve, but to take that conscious control and be able to change things? That to me is the absolute crux of this.
Absolutely. And that's the other giveaway that I've sent you, or I will send you this afternoon, the 7 steps to finding your happiness, because it really is, the first step is that you have to acknowledge that you deserve to be happy. You are a child of the universe or a child of God, or whatever your belief system allows you to think. There is something bigger out there and you're just a small part of it. But you are in charge of whether you feel good or whether you feel bad. If you focus on something that makes you feel bad, you'll feel bad, and more will come to you that will help you feel even worse. But if you can shift your focus to something that feels good, even if it's just the beautiful sunshine that we have here in Cairns today. Sorry to say that if it's really freezing in Sydney. But, Even if it's raining and you love the sound of rain on the roof, whatever it is that makes you feel good, maybe it's the smile on a baby's face, or maybe it's when you first fell in love, or doesn't matter. There are many things I'm sure you will find that you can bring yourself to thinking about or looking at photos of, and it feels good. And once you make that deliberate decision to feel good like that as much of the time as you can, and especially when something drags you out of that good feeling place, you make a deliberate choice to get back into that good feeling place. Now you're back in control of your life and you can create whatever you want.
I think that point, that fact that we have the conscious choice, that we're a conscious creator of our own reality, that we can make a deliberate decision to focus on the positive, that's been definitely a thing that has expanded my possibilities for sure. And I think just touching lightly on, because I know when I first was coming across these concepts, it's like, well, that's pretty Pollyanna, for goodness sake. Like, my house has just been robbed. How can I focus on the positive? But we're not saying that you pull a sheet over the stuff that isn't good and you just pretend it doesn't exist. That would be foolish. It's recognizing, or this is how I feel, I'd love your perspective on it. It's recognizing and accepting that bad things or unpleasant things or things that you might not entirely choose do happen. So you can't control that, but what you can control is your reaction, the way that you respond to that, the way that you choose to face it and to move on or move sideways but not get stuck with it. So that's been always my take. Is that similar to how you feel?
That's very similar. I think that's exactly it, really, because you might even ask yourself a question of, why do these things keep happening to me? Because there's one of those patterns that we talked about earlier. If bad things keep happening to you, it's because there's something in your energy system from the past that needs to be cleared. It might be just that you saw your parents worrying about lack of safety in the world. It might be something as simple as that, or it might be that something bad did happen to you. But once that's cleared out of your energy system, now it's no longer your point of attraction, and really bad things do stop happening. You don't have to look far, because there are bad things everywhere. And if you turn on the news at night, you're very much aware of the bad stuff happening. But it's your reaction to it, as you just said, that changes, and your sense of safety and peace in the world that changes.
I remember when we were doing the practitioner training, one of the things that we talked about was the choice to be able to influence your surroundings. So that point you were just making about the bad stuff that we hear on the news all the time, we can actually choose not to engage. Again,
Indeed.
I'm not talking. We're not talking the ostrich here. Like, stick my head in the sand. It's not happening. It's not happening. I mean, I understand that what's going on in the world, but I choose as much as possible to surround myself with positivity that will allow me to lift my vibration, so that I can act from that more positive place.
Yes, absolutely. We know that bad things are happening all around. You don't even have to watch the news to get a sense of that. But it's whether you choose to focus on that and feel bad about it, and that doesn't help anybody, or whether you choose to get yourself into a better feeling place. Just imagine how it would be if everybody on the earth made a choice to get into a better feeling place, if everybody actually cleared all the junk from their past and started to feel that sense of peace. I reckon that would be world peace, and then the newscasters would have nothing to report.
And piece by piece, I think that is so true. You think about, when you're in a perpetual, or when you're in a bad mood, you radiate that. And then when you take that out into the world, that's the vibe that you are sharing, and then people react to that. They bounce off you and react in a similar way. That's the universal principle, isn't it, of you attract what it is that you are radiating.
Absolutely, and you can bet your life, if you go out into the traffic and you're feeling angry or frustrated, you'll find lots of experiences to be angry and frustrated about. They'll just turn up for you. But if you go back intending to love the world and bless, whoever you see, and just feel good no matter what, if you make that choice, then all that good stuff comes back to you.
Yeah, and I love that perspective, and I think it's that need to step into that, to actually give it a go. I do think I've got a little bit of a Pollyanna core. I think that's just the way that I was wired, but I'm pretty happy about that. But
I think so, yes.
But I totally agree. If we could actually try this on for size, because the traffic jams is a great example. I know back in the old days when I used to have to travel into the city all the time for work, I used to get the shits. Let's put it. Let's speak truth. Being stuck in those jams. These days, I actually can let go of that a lot more because I've got fantastic podcasts to listen to, CDs to listen to, so much learning in my car as I'm driving, and it's fine. The actual situation hasn't changed at all. There's still a traffic jam. But my response to it is the thing that I can control, and that can make my day a lot nicer.
Absolutely. And so the people around you feel that as well, and you feel it, and that's the important thing.
Oh, that's fabulous. Well, as we're coming full circle in this conversation, what would you like our listeners to most remember and to most take away from this podcast when they switch off and step back into their everyday life?
To summarise it really briefly, I'd like them to understand that they can be happy, they deserve to be happy, it's just a choice.
Let that one land. You deserve to be happy, you can be happy, it is your choice. I think that's wonderful. Now, if we want to pursue this happiness in a proactive way and find you out there in the big wide web, where will we find you online?
Okay, so it's www.personalpeace.com.au, and I do work with people by Skype and phone and Zoom if people are on Zoom and all sorts of other ways, and it's just as effective to do that work from a distance as it is, face-to-face in my room. I've also got my book, the e-book, which I think you've mentioned, which is called Finding Happiness. Mm-hmm. The original book that I wrote, which is called Finding Peace Now, is also available out there on Amazon and all sorts of other online stores. So that combines, actually, that book is all about the combination of using EFT and law of attraction, really to find peace. But it's all about clearing the past. So, however I can help people do that, I'm delighted to do that.
That's wonderful, and I'll make sure those links are on the podcast page as well so that people can very simply click through, find the books, find your website, and find you. Thank you so much, Suzanne. This has been a really expansive conversation. I really enjoyed it.
That's great. Thank you.
And for everyone listening now, that message that Suzanne left us with, the concept that you can be happy, you deserve to be happy, you are worthy of happiness, and you can actually make some changes right here today to decide of how you're going to respond to the things that are happening in your life and to choose happiness. That is a choice for you, especially in your next chapter, as you're stepping into something new, a new way of being, a new way of doing. So I hope you found this episode really helpful, and if you're wanting to go a little bit deeper into this concept of tapping, of EFT, so that you can release that past and move forward with a clean slate and a better understanding of yourself, then I really encourage you to get in touch with Suzanne and see how that can lift you up in your next chapter. So thanks again for your time of coming in and spending it with us listening to this podcast. This is Angela Rasper saying goodbye for now, and I'll talk with you again really soon. Take care. Thanks for listening to the Your Next Chapter podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please let me know. Pop over to angelaraspers.com to subscribe to the show and leave a review. And whilst you're there, you can also enjoy valuable free resources, including show notes and downloads, along with the Next Chapter community, where you can connect with other wholehearted women on the same journey as you. We'd love to welcome and support you as your next chapter unfolds. See you next time.